Let me
and sailors.
turn on
Everyone, you'll see it's me,
the
you, Jay,
recorder.
Eli.
Ms. Medina, you're standing right in the way of the recorder.
Sorry.
So it's 11 o'clock. We need to finish talking about, I posted a lecture from last semester on products in case you wanted to watch it, because I didn't have the video camera available last Thursday when we started talking about that. We'll finish talking about that, then we'll talk about pricing today, and then hopefully we'll move into a little bit of advertising and promotional elements of the 4 Ps. And then on Thursday, if we don't get it to it today, I'm going to ask you about what makes the ad great, the ad that you chose, and why you chose it. I thought we might do something interesting and have you all sell the ad. How's that sound on Thursday?
Sell the ad.
You don't want to sell the ad?
Yeah, I mean, why not?
We haven't even done.
It wouldn't take that long to prepare. I mean, how long are you like asking me to like make this presentation?
Like a 5-minute sales pitch?
No, that wouldn't take that. I'd be about it.
No? Nobody wants to do that? Why not?
Hey, wait. Could it replace the 3-page paper monstrosity, you know,
No,
the
they
practical
have to-
case?
Let me borrow my freaking
Because I would much
pencil.
rather present to do that at the details.
Of course,
You clearly just
responses
saw
to
the
critical thinking challenges can win bonus points, which would be, of course, added into your total package. And if you want to do a really good,
like, yeah.
if you want to do a really
Somebody
good
said what?
presentation, you know, it could increase your return on investment in terms of your overall grade. But if you all just want to be boring, talk about it.
How much will it?
Talking about it just as,
Yeah, hell yeah.
as selling it.
You're in my world now, let's do this.
So we will finish talking about products. So we talked about the 3 sort of theories of products with regard to the law and some of the other implications of each of these theories, moving from caveat emptor to a theory of negligence, just as a reminder for those of you who have slept since last time. So caveat emptor says that it's all up to the buyer. Let the buyer beware. And that worked pretty well for a long period in our history because it was not that difficult to evaluate things. If you were living in the early part of the 20th century, the latter half of the 19th century, when people still largely rode horses and things like that, you could probably evaluate with a relatively, unsophisticated amount of knowledge what the product was going to do. You know, it's pretty easy to evaluate things like shirts and sweaters and things like that. You can look at the stitching. People back then knew more about those kinds of products than perhaps we do today. It's really not possible to evaluate the safety of products in the contemporary era as a result of really sophisticated technology. How are you going to evaluate the overall effectiveness of a safety restraint system? And we talked about sort of the development of seat belts and how that went from, just the lap belt in the back that would keep your little body there but could cause problems if the belt was twisted in terms of cutting you in half or internal bleeding. So we got the shoulder harnesses. Now we have airbags. The first airbags were inherently dangerous to anybody who was not statistically average because it could create damage in terms of snapping your neck. If you were, a woman who was below what the statistical average, they were made for my height and my weight at the time that they first came out, and they've adapted. And those are things that are really difficult for a consumer to evaluate. So we move into a theory of negligence, which says that you have a duty if you're going to manufacture things to manufacture them reasonably well and in a reasonably safe manner. This leads to the imposition of something called the implied warranty of merchantability with regard to products. So all products that are sold and manufactured in the United States have what's called, under the UCC, an implied warranty of merchantability. And for those of you who remember this from your legal environment class, what is the implied warranty of merchantability? With regard to the manufacturer of goods, what's the implied warranty of merchantability?
Isn't it like when the buyer sets a certain type
Okay, I think what you're actually referring to is a warranty, an implied warranty for a specific purpose. If the buyer says, for example, to a dealer, I bet that would make a really good step stool. And the dealer says, yep, that would make a really good step stool. And the buyer buys that chair and falls off of it. He's got an implied warranty of a specific purpose because the dealer has sort of said, yep, that would make a really good step stool. The dealer has an obligation in that instance to say what? Yeah, hell no, don't do that. Don't step on that chair. That's not what it, no, an implied warranty of merchantability means that it should be reasonably safe for the purpose for which it is made, which is sitting, not standing on it. Like what would make that inherently dangerous as a step stool? Well, it's got these roller things, and you could step on it and it could go flying out from under you. So with this idea of duty, we get this implied warranty of merchantability, which says that things should be reasonably safe for the purpose to which they are ordinarily used. If you're using an axe, it should stay on the what? The handle. It shouldn't come flying off the handle and hit somebody in the head. You should be able to use it. Now, does that mean that you can use the axe as a toy? No, that's not the purpose to which it is made. So we get this idea of negligence and duty. And students generally, and I said I was going to ask you, what theory, we've got a number of theories that we've talked about overall. So we've got caveat emptor. What ethical theory could support caveat emptor? Let the buyer beware. So we've got a theory of utility. We've got a theory of duty, deontological ethics. We've got a theory of virtue. And then we've got the moral minimum. What theory could be used to support caveat emptor?
Deontological.
Deontological? Which is what? How would you get a duty out of that? Not sure I agree with that. You think it's the moral minimum?
Yeah, because I mean, once the deal's done, all liability's not really with, it's buyers. It's all the buyer. So.
How are you going to get a duty, since you said duty, how are you going to get duty out of caveat emptor?
I actually put down that, negligence is the deontological. And
Really?
utilitarian is liability. That's what I forgot. I'm
What
sorry.
about caveat emptor?
I don't know.
What theory could be used to support caveat emptor? Well, let's think about one of the big things that has become fashionable today to talk about, which is called tort reform. What is tort reform? Well, the idea is, and it's a horrible idea, by the way. It is primarily promulgated by the Conservative Party because they don't like this idea of frivolous lawsuits. And it's a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. But they justify it on utilitarian grounds, which are what? I told you that when I was growing up, the average car in the United States in the 1980s was around $10,000. The average car today, what has happened with most of technology, by the way, over the progression of time?
Cheaper.
It's gotten cheaper. The average car today is well over $30,000. Why is that? Well, a lot of people say it's these frivolous lawsuits. Companies have to build into the price the idea that they're going to be liable maybe for these lawsuits that are just totally frivolous. Now the problem with tort, so what tort reform says is we're going to cap damages. We're going to cap damages to a certain amount. Now this is one of the things that they argued was that we're going to cap damages. The first area that they did it was the idea that, well, we'll do it in medical the state of Texas passed tort reform under George W. Bush. And they said, we're going to cap damages with regard to medical claims. You had an actual damage limit of, you know, you could basically institute costs, but the punitive damages were capped. Now, this sounds like a good idea, because what a lot of people said was, what you're doing is what's happened to medical costs. Like automobiles, what's happened with medical costs. Over time, this thing, the first monitor that my mother bought for her first computer was nothing like this. It was huge, it was big, it was bulky. She bought an IBM PC for a real estate company, and it cost something like $10,000, and the monitor was about $1,000 of that. And it had this printer that could print out typewritten quality documents, because at the time, printers were dot matrix. Most of the printers were dot matrix. How many of you have seen a dot matrix printer? They had this very odd paper that was computer paper. It would actually print this machine. You had this printer that was called a Diablo, and it was so loud. It was so loud that it had to come with its own special box that you put it in, because it literally sounded like a mad secretary was taking a typewriter and hitting all the keys constantly, because it would type very, very quickly. And it had this daisy wheel thing that had and it would hit a ribbon, just like a typewriter would back in the old-fashioned days, and hit the paper, but it was enormously loud. Imagine, you used to go into office buildings and there would be a secretarial pool that did nothing but type, and you'd go in there and there would be like this loud racket from people sitting there at typing machines. Maybe some of you have seen an really old movie now with Dolly Parton called 9 to 5. How many of you have seen that movie? Right, and they're in the typing pool, and it was an enormously loud thing. And so, this has gotten a lot cheaper. What can you buy this monitor for at Walmart today? I bet it's $100. I bet it's not even $150. I mean, you can get a bigger monitor than this. How many monitors do most? I mean, the first time I saw somebody with 2 monitors, I thought, wow, that's really, that's crazy. Who the hell needs 2 monitors? Now I've got 2 monitors and I want 3. And I need lots of property here. Yes, go ahead. You were going to say something. Didn't you? Yeah.
Oh, no, I just said 150.
I mean, they've got ones that are 4K, they're like $1,200, but.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can, sure. I mean, if you want high resolution and all kinds of stuff, you could spend a lot of money on a monitor. But this monitor, it's a Dell monitor. I'd be willing to bet it's $100, and I'd be willing to bet we didn't pay that because we got it on a state contract, so it's even less than that. The price to manufacture this is really, really cheap. But medicine has gone up, and a lot of people say the reason it's gone up is because of these frivolous lawsuits. People are suing doctors. George W. Bush, when he was president, said, too many docs are getting out of the business. Too many OBGYNs, direct quote, are getting out because they're not able to practice their love of women all across the nation. Huh?
That may
What?
have words.
And he was talking about tort reform. The idea that, like if you have a baby and you do something to cause that baby damage, they're going to sue you. It's going to be expensive, and that's caused prices to go up. Now, why is tort reform a horrible idea? Because if the lawsuit is truly frivolous, and you award that plaintiff one dime, you have overcompensated that plaintiff. However, what you do is you take the worst injured plaintiff and you've now capped their damage. It is hurting the most injured party. You take the guy who, the surgeon, I had surgery on my hip this semester. And when I went in to get surgery, they come in, the doctor comes in, and he says, what leg are we operating on? I had surgery on this hip. And I said, my right hip. And he says, right, that's right, your right hip, you're sure. Before they give you the drugs, right? And he marks with a pen on my hip. This is where we're going to do the surgery. And then the anesthesiologist comes in and asks you the same, and it's very annoying. Because I don't like to get up early, although I seem to get up early anyway because of my age. That's something that happens after you hit 40. you have this horrible insomnia and you're just sort of up. But I'm not a real pleasant person at 5 in the morning, and that's what time you go in, generally to have these surgeries done. They want you there at like 5, so they can do all the prep and stuff like that. And the anesthesiologist comes in, and he's asking the same question. Are you an idiot? But the reason they're asking that question is to make sure that they don't operate on the wrong hip. But let's suppose there were instances, there was a case in Amarillo, after tort reform was passed, where a construction worker had a injury on the right foot. The doctor operated on the left foot. That left him completely incapable of walking. It cut off a nerve. And if you're a construction worker, walking is sort of important. The jury awarded him $250,000 in damages because of tort reform. Now, $250,000, you're saying, oh God, that sounds like a lot of money. Somebody who can't work anymore is now capped at $250,000. How fast can you go through $250,000?
A little under 3 years.
What?
A little under 3 years.
If you're talking about me, that's less than half my salary. If you're talking about a construction worker, maybe, if he's making $75,000 a year, what, you've got 3 or 4 years there? Is that going to make that person whole? You're taking the most injured person and you are limiting their damages. Now, I suppose, the idea is, let's go back to this idea of caveat emptor, because things will get cheaper. We'll have more competition in the market. They won't have to worry about lawsuits. What does that sound like? What kind of theory does that sound like? It sounds like utilitarian, doesn't it? More products, the market will take place. Those doctors who operate on the wrong leg, who don't go in and take the time to say things like, which leg are we operating on? And have their anesthesiologist follow up with, which leg are we operating on today? Well, people will start posting on Angie's List. That guy operated on the wrong leg. I can no longer walk. I can't do my job. Sucks to be me, but hey, you all, here's the information, and that doctor will go out of business, in theory, right? But what will happen for the prices? And they assured us, George W. Bush assured us, that in Texas, after they passed tort reform, prices of medical devices and prices of medicine would fall dramatically and drastically.
Take one.
Did that happen? No, it didn't. Medical prices continue to soar. You're taking the most injured party and you're injuring them. But this sounds like utility. Negligence. What theory supports negligence? Now we're saying you're going to have a duty to be safe. What theory supports negligence? I said I was going to ask you this last time. What? Yeah, it's duty. It's real easy to pick that one out, isn't it? Because it's duty. Because it starts with the word what? What are the elements of negligence? Duty, right? Starts with duty. What's the second element?
Breach of duty.
Breach of duty. What's the third element?
Injury.
Injury. And what's the fourth element?
Causation.
Proximate cause, yeah. Causation and fact and proximate cause. In the proximate cause case is the false case. So I think negligence is duty. Then we get to we get to strict products liability. We didn't really finish talking about strict products liability. What's strict products liability say? Strict products liability now says if you manufacture something,
You have a duty to protect it when you sell it.
you are liable irrespective of duty. Even if you manufacture things in the most reasonably prudent, careful way, you are going to be liable, manufacturer, for any injuries that happen. Let's go back to medical sales. Most of you probably did not follow my advice at the beginning of the semester when I said go get your flu shot. Because Mr. Reynolds believes that he's going to get the flu from the flu shot. Wrong. Absolutely, 100%, a priori, wrong. Didn't you tell me that you got the flu?
The one time I've actually had the flu, I got a flu shot that year.
Okay. And of course, that is a logical fallacy called what?
Oh, I forgot.
Prompter hoc ergo post hoc. Because of this, therefore that, which assumes causation, what? By mere succession in time. He gets the flu shot and he develops the flu. You didn't get the flu from the flu shot. Does the flu shot guarantee that you won't get the flu? No.
So what's the point?
The flu shot guarantees that you will probably not get the worst strain of the flu that they have that year, that they believe is going to happen that year. And that if you do, that its severity and intensity will probably be less intense. And for elderly people, this is really important because what causes a lot of deaths of elderly people? Well, they get the flu, and that then turns into what? Pneumonia, and they die. Right? They die of this opportunistic secondary infection. But Mr. Reynolds incorrectly believes that the flu shot made him sick.
At least the Latin fallacy
Now,
sounds cool.
what?
I said at least the Latin of the fallacy sounds cool.
Oh, yeah, okay, sounds cool. A more important thing would be, how many of you have gotten the flu shot before? Mr. Reynolds has gotten the flu shot at least once, I know, since I'm picking on him.
Just once.
Just once.
Just once.
Did you have to sit there for 15 minutes?
What do you mean? Before, like
After you
after?
didn't have an allergic
Yeah,
reaction.
to make sure you didn't have an allergic reaction.
I don't know. Probably. I'm assuming yeah.
In my hometown, they do it out of the car. You stick your arm out the window and they do it out the car and you just drive off.
Yeah,
And it's free if you bring like a canned food item.
right. Well, they're supposed to ask you if you've ever had the flu shot before. If you haven't had the flu shot,
Awesome.
they're not supposed to just let you drive off.
Yeah.
Probably reasons
Because
I don't do it. Whatever.
there's
I'm the crazy one.
I like
a
it.
chance.
I've never got one.
There's a certain percentage chance that you'll go into anaphylaxis.
Whoops.
And this could be bad,
You got an EpiPen somewhere?
and you could die. But if you're standing there when they give you the shot and you start developing hives in your throat and it starts closing up and you go into anaphylaxis, what will they do?
EpiPen.
They'll give you the EpiPen, right? They'll shoot you with the epinephrine. How many of you have seen a movie called Pulp Fiction? I really
It doesn't
wanted
work. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
The
But I
needle's not
really
big
want to
enough.
do that. You know, the needle into the heart with the epinephrine. I really want to do that.
I've thought about it.
That's not really the way it works, but it makes for a great scene in a movie. A certain number of people now,
So we can
before we release drugs
know what's going on.
onto the general public, we test them. We start by testing them on what? Like rats, right? You are 95%, don't take the percentages literally, but something like that. 95% similar to a rat. So we start by testing things on rats, and then we move up to, if it works, we test it on what?
Bunnies.
Well, primates, not bunnies, primates, because you're 98% similar to a monkey or chimpanzee.
Just a whole lot more attractive.
Genetically, how similar am I to you?
White.
Yeah, it's 99% similar. There's a whole lot of variance when we talk about statistics, right? There's a whole lot of variance that can go along. What is the variance, by the way? What is variance?
The difference?
No, the difference is not a measure of dispersion. The variance is a measure of dispersion. So if we look at the formula for standard deviation, it's lowercase sigma equals the square root of sigma xi minus mu squared over n for a population. If you look at the standard deviation for a sample, it's S equals sigma xi minus x bar squared over n minus 1. And why do you have n minus 1? You lose 1 degree of freedom for the sample. The sample is an unbiased representation of the population. This part of the formula here is what's called the what? The variance. The variance. Whole lot of variance in that 1%. So even though you and I are pretty similar, there's a chance that when they hit you with that shot, you go into anaphylaxis and you die. Sounds bad, doesn't it? Whoops. Sucks to be you. But hey, get your flu shot. And guess what the interesting thing about allergies is? They give you the flu shot the first time, they make you stand there for 15 minutes and watch, and after that they don't. But the interesting thing about allergies is that they can change over time. People who have never been allergic to shellfish, all of a sudden, one of my friends, she's a chef, grew up on the northeast coast. What do they cook a lot of in the northeast? Shellfish. They cook a lot of shellfish. One day she and her husband sat down to dinner. She starts eating a bunch of shrimp that she fixed. She starts going into anaphylaxis. Allergies can change over time. So you may not be allergic to the flu shot now. The reason that people are allergic to the flu shot is that they incubate them. It's called avian flu, and they incubate they get the virus from eggs. You could develop an allergy over time and die. Now what strict products liability says is, even though you've taken every precaution, what's the precaution? We tested it on rats, we tested it on chimpanzees, we now are giving it to humans, and it's reasonably safe, and we know that, out of 100,000 people, one is going to kick the bucket, or has the potential going into anaphylactic shock. And guess what, manufacturer? It doesn't matter that you took every reasonable precaution. You're liable for that person's death. What theory supports this? I don't think it's duty. It's utilitarian. It's utility. What's the utility? Who's in a better position to pay? I told you last time about a case called Searcy versus Ford. Willie Searcy's riding in front of his father's Ford F-150 pickup. As he's pushing against the tension regulator, it doesn't catch. His father slams into the car in front of them, and he slams into the window. He becomes a quadriplegic. They estimated that it would take $25 million to care for him for the rest of his life. Ford appealed. In the meantime, between the time that the appeals court heard it and sent it back to the trial court for a new trial, Willie Searcy died. One of the links in the chain that kept him alive needed 24-hour-a-day constant monitoring to care for his respirator, to clean and change that device to make sure it wasn't clogged. And he died. There's a movie, I saw it the other day, I can't remember what the name of it is. It's with the guy who plays one of the characters in the Hunger Games, and he plays a quadriplegic. Haven't you seen that movie? I'll think that he plays a quadriplegic who wants to die, basically, because it's so difficult to live. They have all kinds of problems. It's what?
Or he wants to kill, or he kills himself?
He kills himself. He goes to the Netherlands in the end. Yeah. Before you. That's it. That's it. Yeah. He falls in love with basically his caretaker, and ends up. Apparently, love doesn't conquer all. He decides he still wants to go to the Netherlands and end his life through euthanasia. It was very sad, but that's what happens when you become a quadriplegic. You have all these problems. Who's in the better position to pay for that care? The Searcy family or Ford Motor Company? Ford Motor Company. It's purely utilitarian. Now the problem with, again, the utilitarian analysis in this is, how do you do the calculus? Ultimately, that cost that Ford had to bear in taking care of until he died, until they basically ran him out of time, ultimately, who does that cost? Why is the Ford F-150 $40,000 now? The average Ford F-150 is $40,000. Well, it's because of all these lawsuits. How do you do the calculus in these? That's one of the things that becomes really, really difficult with regard to this theory of strict products liability. Two types of strict products liability. And I'm not sure that one of them isn't really a negligence theory. Because it sounds more like negligence to me, and I actually wrote an article about this and tried to get it published on whether or not it was actually negligence. The two types of strict products liability are design defect and manufacturing defect. Design defect sounds more like negligence to me, because what you're saying is that as a result of a design that could be improved, somebody died or was injured. Samsung, what's their Galaxy that's been recalled that they won't let on airplanes? The Note what? 7. The Note 7, right? Their battery manufacturer, that's a design defect case in products liability. If somebody's injured by that, what you're saying is that you could have designed a safer battery. Now that actually sounds like a negligence theory to me, because what you're really saying is you have a duty to design something that's reasonably safe, and your design led to a bad, but the lawyers still think that it's strict products liability. The second type does sound like strict products liability, and that's called the manufacturing defect. What's the result of a manufacturing defect? Well, in the manufacturing process, you're going to have just a certain number of things that go wrong, that happen in that process. For example, how many parts per million of rat feces and bug tentacles are allowed in ketchup? Did you know that? I'm thinking the answer should be what? Yeah, I'm thinking the answer should be 0. There should be, I'm thinking there should be no rat feces or bug parts in my ketchup. The answer is that there are. There are, right? Upton Sinclair wrote a famous book about this called The Jungle. And people say, there's an age-old adage that says, anyone who likes politics and sausage should not watch either being made, because it's a bad process. In that process, over the years, a certain number of people through contamination. What happens when feces enters food chains? Well, you can get things like, E. coli. This happened with an outbreak of E. coli in peanut butter 5 years ago. How many of you remember that? And
Wasn't there some in spinach too?
there's been some in spinach. There's been some in, famously, more recently than the peanut butter. The peanut butter was dramatic because the chairman of the House committee that called the peanut butter manufacturer, I think it was Peter Pan, the manufacturer of Peter Pan, to come testify. He testified that they didn't think there was any reason they should have to recall that peanut butter, that it was perfectly safe. And the chair of the congressional committee picks up a can of peanut butter and sets it on the desk and says, then you eat it. Here's a spoon. Contain some of the peanut butter that they manufactured. You wouldn't think that there would be E. coli in peanut butter or in vegetables. Doesn't seem like you can understand E. coli contamination in beef, can't you?
Yeah.
Because they're gutting an animal, and E. coli is naturally found in the gut, and that can be problematic. But there was lettuce. What's the most recent one? Which restaurant chain? Chipotle had problems with their. That to me sounds like strict products. No matter how safe you are, a certain amount. I mean, you just can't make sure that every bug doesn't fly into the manufacturing floor. You can't, as much as we put hairnets on people, you can't make sure. By the way, if you work in a food processing plant, I have a friend who's a food scientist. She was a vice president for quality assurance for PR Foods up in Enid, and then she went to work for a subsidy of Tyson in Fort Smith. You're not allowed, if you work in those facilities, you're not allowed to wear any jewelry. No jewelry, because that can end up falling in. It can contaminate. People don't wash under their rings enough, and so there's all these things. But there's a certain amount of things that are just going to go wrong. That's a manufacturing defect. When Ford manufactures product, they stamp out dies, right? And what happens to the die as you stamp out more and more and more pieces, let's say parts for a door, what happens to that die? It wears, and what happens? The amount of tolerance between the first car off the line and the last before they change that die can lead to some real, even though it may only be a half a millimeter off, can lead to some real interesting results, right? That's a manufacturing defect, and that does seem to be, no matter how safe you are, there's going to be the grasshopper that flies in to the ketchup, or the rat that runs across the thing and drops, feces in, that comes in from the field, whatever. So there are two types. Any questions about product safety issues? Let's talk a little bit about price. Pricing issues. Of the 4 Ps, which do you think is the most important?
Placement.
Placement?
Price.
You really think placement is the most important?
Absolutely, I mean, because it kind of sets the precedent for supply and demand.
Price sets the demand.
Well, you could argue that product is the most important. If you don't have a product, you have nothing.
Fair enough.
If you have no product, you have absolutely no business whatsoever.
You don't have people to sell it to, though.
If you don't have people, well, that deals with coming up with a good enough product that people want to buy. Marketing scholars who study these various things will tell you that each one of these is, marketing scholars who study services, for example, when we talk about the product part, we can talk about services, which are, we call them products even though they're intangibles. Services scholars argue that all products are really services, and that services is the most important thing. Is there any product that you value intrinsically in and of itself? No. You value it for the service. Do you value that iPad? Do you sit there and look at it and say, oh, how beautiful?
What about art?
Art is the one thing that you might say is purely valued intrinsically for its own sake. However, lots of people value it for other things, right? For what? For what?
Who painted it?
Okay, who painted it?
I can tell you that car guys value cars by the look of them.
They value the thing in and of itself,
Yeah.
not for any service that it provides.
Like, well, yeah, because I can look at my car and I'm like, man, that is a beautiful piece of work.
What kind of car do you have?
It's a Mustang.
You have a Mustang?
Yeah.
And you really think that's a pretty car? Really?
Yeah.
I'm kind of a Ford guy, but I don't think the Mustang is a terribly pretty car.
Yeah, I like it.
You like it? Okay. It's not a Rolls Royce. Although the new Rolls Royces, I don't think are terribly pretty cars.
I don't drive a car to be comfy. I drive a car to be scared. So.
You drive the car. Well, then that's the service. It's providing a thrill for you, right? It's not. I mean, it's getting you where you need to go. You don't value that iPad. Although Steve Jobs, the Apple II, what did he have everybody do? Actually, it was the Macintosh, the first Macintosh that they made. What did he have everybody do? If you opened up the cover, people said, Steve, no one's ever going to look inside the cover. He said, somebody will. What did everybody who worked on that project do? They signed it. Their signatures, it was like it was a piece of art. Their signatures were on the inside of the case. And people said, nobody's ever going to look at that. And he said, somebody will. So maybe art you value for its own sake. People who study product, who have strategy in marketing say, of course, the product, you have to have a good product to begin with, otherwise you're doomed from the beginning. Branding scholars will tell you that the most important decision that a company will make will be the brand name. I tend to think that's not true, having practiced law and taken lots of companies where people had catchy brand names. They had very, very nice logos, good letterhead, nice business cards, crappy product went broke. I've seen that multiple times as a bankruptcy attorney, and took multiple people through bankruptcy. I had a doctor who had a really nice clinic, beautiful clinic, all this stuff, went broke. took him through bankruptcy. He had a great card, great logo, broke. Of course, it may have been the fact that when I said, how did you amass all these bills? He said, well, I live in a house I can't afford and drive a vehicle I can't afford because I believe that the end times are upon us and Jesus is coming back and he's going to turn you into a blood statue because I'm a Jew. And I sort of went, wow, like you're supposed to be a man of science and like this is the hee-haw you're spouting? Really? Jesus didn't save you from bankruptcy, but he had a nice clinic and a nice card, nice logo. Yeah. Bankrupt. But branding scholars will tell you that's the most important decision. Pricing scholars, people who study price, say that price is the most important piece. Why is that? Price is where all the other business decisions come together. It represents what? It represents the opportunity cost that the business is willing to forego to manufacture this product, and it represents the sacrifice or the opportunity cost that the consumer is willing to accept to get the product. That's one of those terms from economics that nobody ever wants to pay attention to, opportunity cost. You can't do everything, can you? If you buy the iPad that you have there, what do you sacrifice? It means that you can't spend that something on something else. You can't spend it on a desktop computer or on Allen Edmonds shoes or on a new car or whatever else it is that you may want. And your wants are unlimited. So price is really, really important because it represents what people are willing to give up in terms of everything else. Now, having said that, with regard to the 4 Ps, it's the one where we don't have any unifying theory. It's the one P in which we don't have a unifying theory. It's so important, and yet we don't have any one unifying theory that tells us how we should price things. Isn't that interesting? With regard to products, we have a theory. Not a grand level theory, but we have a theory about what you should do in order to bring a product to market. What is that? How many steps are in that? For those of you that are marketers, which everyone in here should be for the most part, what are the number of steps that we say that you should have to bring a product to market? Now, by the way, Apple has been successful. Steve Jobs never followed any of these steps. He just decided in his head. What did Steve Jobs think about consumers? What was his attitude towards consumers?
They were ignorant.
Huh?
Wasn't it more like towards that they're ignorant? You just put
Yeah, you don't know what you want.
I know what you want.
You have no idea what you want. I'm going to tell you what you want. He was a completely product-driven company. You have no idea what's cool. I'm going to tell you what's cool. As long as Steve was alive, that worked okay. He released all kinds of stuff that we really did think was pretty cool. I remember when the first iPhone came out, people stood in line to get it. Now, what's the iPhone viewed at? Is it the coolest? What has kept you from switching? How many of you have an iPhone? Why haven't you switched? Is it the coolest product out there? I don't think it is.
I think it's the most consistently performing though.
I don't think it's nearly the coolest.
I think most of us probably got it when it was cool, and then that's what I did. I just stuck with it.
You got it when it was cool? I really thought that Samsung was going to beat out iPhone for a while because they came up with this ad where this guy walks by and he says, oh, I see you're waiting in line for the new iPhone. I guess that Samsung didn't work out for you. And he said, no, I'm just holding my place. I'm just holding the place for somebody. And then it's his parents who walk up. And the ultimate of not cool for your generation is what?
My parents have it.
Your parents have it. That's the ultimate in not cool anymore.
That's what
But you still have this, what?
That's what's killing Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, when your parents start creeping around on Facebook, yeah, you want to, although statistics do show us that your generation overwhelmingly likes their parents more than other generations have in the past. You're the first generation that actually views your parents as being your friends. Most of your parents are probably my generation, they're probably Gen Xers. I remember the first time I had a student come up to me that was one of my high school classmates' kids. And she came up and she said, Dr. Aguirre, I think you went to, did I tell you all this story? She said, Dr. Aguirre, I think you went to high school with my parents. I said, no, I'm far too young. I'm far too young to have a child your age. And she said, you went to Guthrie, right? Yeah.
Oh, what the heck?
And I said, I am far too young to have a child your age. She goes off. She comes back. I took her mother to prom. She comes back with my high school senior yearbook. And she says, this is you and my mother.
It's really not.
And I looked at her and I said, you know, it is unimportant whether or not you like me. From the standpoint of your grade in this class, what is more important is that I like you and I don't like you. So most of you now are the products of Gen Xers. And because Gen X was the first me generation, you all studies show that you do kind of like your parents. More so, my Gen Xers, their parents were either traditionalists or baby boomers. And so baby boomers still had a lot of those traditionalist values, those ideas that you go to work, you work hard for what you want. My generation was the first to say, I don't really want to do that. You know, like the whole reason I got the job that I made a lot more money as a lawyer, as a corporate attorney. A lot more money. I did not want to work that hard. I didn't. I did not want to work as hard as I had to work to be a corporate vice president. It was a miserable existence, working 85 and 90 hours a week for a lot of money, and I had no time to spend it. So my generation was the first. So we do know that your generation does tend to like their parents more. An overwhelmingly large number of you still live with your parents and don't view that as necessarily being a bad thing and intend to live with your parents. A lot of you will live with your parents until you're in your 30s. Actually.
I would live under a bridge.
No, I shall not.
Okay. Is your mother, is she a baby boomer or an Xer?
She was born 63-4. I don't know what the exact.
She's on the cusp of being an Xer.
What?
Right. I'm clearly in the Xer. My brother is on the verge of being a millennial. He was born in 1979. At the end of 1979, so most people say that that generational cohort started in 1980 because they came of age right at the millennial, right? So that's the beginning of that generational cohort. So my brother's sort of at the beginning of the millennials. I'm sort of squarely in the middle of the Xers. So your mother's kind of, she's at the beginning of the Xers. And so you can see why that would be. But a lot of you want to live at home with your parents. See nothing wrong with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. So, back to, now that I've given you my little tangent on likes, back to price. Marketing scholars who study all these other things will tell you that there are unifying theories in these other areas. With regard to placement, which we'll talk briefly about on Thursday, what's sort of the unifying theory in terms of placement? So there are 7 steps. I started this by asking you how many steps there were, and I just gave you the answer. There are 7 steps that we would say that you need to bring a product to market successfully. What does that start out with? Well, what's the first sort of step? You're going to combine 2 things that we talked about in the introductory class to marketing. You're going to combine the environmental scan with a SWOT analysis, right? You're going to combine the environmental scan with your strengths, weaknesses to determine whether or not there is a market for something out there. Steve Jobs didn't do that with the iPhone. He just said, I'm going to manufacture this phone and I'm going to put it out there and people will think it's cool. And we did think it was cool. Now the reason that you all haven't switched, this is the answer, going back around to that discussion, even though your parents have the iPhone and even though your parents are creeping around on Facebook, the reason that you haven't switched is because of a price issue. And what's that price issue?
Once you're in a phone, it's much easier to stay with the
It's the
same
switching
provider.
cost. Yeah, it's the switching cost. Apple makes it easy to switch between this device and the next one up, right? Everything is uploaded to your iCloud, all of your games, all of your contacts, all of that stuff is on your iCloud. How many of you got it all stored up there in the cloud somewhere? And when you get the iPhone 7, what's going to happen to all of that? Well, it's all going to download into your iPhone really nicely and neatly. I have a whole bunch of games that my nephew's downloaded onto this phone. The reason I really want a Google Pixel phone. But I've got this Paradise Bay game that he put on there that I've now got all of this stuff on my island. I've got like the bakery and I've got, you know, all these different things. I've got like 8 people living on the island now. You know, something mindless to do. I have this rodeo stampede. All of that's information stored up in the iCloud. And if I go to the store to replace this and get the iPhone 7, it'll all just sync right down to that one. If I get a Google Pixel, what the hell do I have to do?
Start over.
Yeah, I mean, God, I don't know. I mean, I might lose all my people.
Forever.
It's not that bad.
I'll take forever.
You know?
I'm starting to think you're just using your nephew as an excuse for how it got on the.
Well,
I've switched 4 times in the last 4 years.
Oh, hell no.
It's you know,
More
you're
work than I would
probably more technologically sophisticated. So there's this price cost to me in terms of my time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I want it to be easy. And so I may just go get the iPhone, even though I really want the Google Pixel phone because it's cooler than the iPhone.
Why is it?
You can play movies on the wall. You can project movies on the wall. Can you do that with an iPhone?
Don't they have
Android
like
box.
things that you can like connect to your
Yes.
iPhone that will?
iPhone 7's
No.
about to be able to do it. iPhone
Well.
7
Don't they
catches
have
them
stuff
up,
like that?
so it'll all be even again or whatever.
Like project a movie on the wall. Now I don't know when I'd want to do this.
That's
That
what
seems
I
like,
when would you
that seems like a really cool
I'm like,
thing
you can do it here.
to be able to do.
My phone battery went out the window real quick. I watched a ton of movies on the wall with it though, so.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Good news
It's
about
got a
Android, it
camera.
doesn't die like your
Like the
iPhone.
zoom on this is very
Sorry.
limited. Like it's got a big
Well,
zoom.
that's because
On the
you probably
iPhone
made a
7
bad choice
Plus.
whether Samsung you guys.
Always got a new camera.
Okay. Well, you know, I don't know. So there's 7 steps in the new product development. You know, it starts with a SWOT, an environmental scan, and you know, then it goes through coming up with an idea,
It's about individual.
bringing up you know, going through a demo phase, alpha testing, beta testing. Where did Google Glass fail in the beta test? People thought it was creepy. They thought Google, they were suspicious of people that were wearing them, that they were being recorded. The truth of the matter is you're being recorded all the time. But people were creeped out by it. They didn't know if you were being recorded. They didn't like it. It failed in beta testing. So, you know, it goes through all of this and then launched. So there's this sort of mid-range theory that suggests how we should go if you want a chance of being successful. There's a really good theory about how you get the product to the consumer with the least amount of costs, right? And what is that called in logistics? Well, a lot of it is just-in-time inventory, right? We have this idea that you get the product to the consumer just when they need it, so that you don't waste time and money doing what? Storing it, warehousing it, transporting it, things like that. You want to make it as efficient as possible. And supposedly Walmart has a really good idea how to do that. With regard to promotion, we have an integrating theory. It's called integrated, interestingly enough, integrated marketing communication. We used to teach a course called advertising. We no longer teach that course. We teach integrated marketing communication. Because advertising, now promotion is much more than it used to be in the past. Price is this critical component because it represents the sacrifice. And there's no unifying theory as to how you should set the price. The price has to be right, because if you don't charge enough to at least cover costs, eventually you do what? go out of business. And if the price is too high, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of products fail, because in order to cover those costs, the business has to charge a certain price, and people just don't want that product. The fact that you have a real passion for something doesn't necessarily mean lots of businesses fail because people have this dream that they want to do something, they want to own their own business, and they retire and they have some savings and they think that because they love Cupid dolls, everybody's going to love Cupid dolls, so they open a Cupid doll shop, and it turns out that Cupid dolls fail. Although it's interesting to me what people would rather have than their own money. How many of you know what precious moments are? You know what a precious moment is? Have you ever been to the Precious Moments factory in Missouri? Oh my God.
My mom and sister went though, so
It's,
kind of counts.
I think precious moments are the tool of the devil. They're these little bug-eyed baby statues. They used to sell them at Hallmark. They have a whole Precious Moments chapel.
Were those little white statues?
They're little bug-eyed babies. I'll show you what a precious moment looks like.
I'll show you what a precious moment is like.
Yeah, I know, I noticed that.
They're creepy. They're these creepy little bug-eyed babies. I have a friend, I use the term loosely, that has every single one that's ever come out. She had her husband build her a house. She has this beautiful dining room, and it's full of shelves that are made out of mahogany that she had him build so that she could display. So you're eating in this beautiful dining room, and there's all these little bug-eyed babies staring down at you. It's just creepy. And they have a whole Precious Moments chapel. So these are them. You can now personalize your precious moments just like you can personalize. This is mass customization. Aren't they creepy?
Nice try.
I think they're kind of cute.
Pretty weird.
I mean, I
Oh
would take
my
that
God.
one, but.
They have, let's see if we can find the precious.
All I'm saying is if she wants to have her old porcelain dolls, she can have those as long as she doesn't talk about like tattoos.
Let's see if we can find the precious
Like
moments
tattoos, it's the
chapel.
same thing. Like when old people are like, oh, tattoos, why would you get something that, like that, that you can't get rid of? It's like, what's happening about that? You have all these plates in here that nobody can eat off of?
Right.
Arthur's Reserve.
I didn't get where you were going.
Oh, you're just wasting money.
There we go.
Tell me that when you have
Is that
plates
it?
in here that nobody can eat off of because they're on display.
It's creepy.
Okay, yeah, that's creepy.
It's creepy.
So if she wants to play.
It's amazing to me what people would rather have than their own money. So I say Cupid dolls, maybe you can start a really good Cupid doll store. Yeah, they make it now. Oh, yeah. I had somebody, this woman that has all these precious moments in her house, she compared this to visiting the Sistine Chapel. I was morally offended by that comparison. Like it's, oh, there's this chapel.
Are those
It's
paintings?
very similar to the Vatican.
Yes,
It's very similar.
yes, it's very similar, I can tell.
Are those paintings though?
Those are paintings, and they have little precious moments throughout, through the chapel, I think, as I recall, having them right there.
There's a giant ball of the orange there too.
That would take forever, look at all those pictures.
Yeah.
There's like small ones and big ones, or even big ones.
So, there's no unifying theory. What are some of the ways that, well, pricing occurs based on what? Company objectives. Obviously, that you have to cover costs, but it's objective. So what are some of the objectives that we can have for pricing? What are some of the pricing objectives? Well, and strategies. Companies might price for profit, to maximize profit. Now this has ethical implications to it. The economist Milton Friedman says that business exists for one reason and one reason only, and that is to what? Maximize shareholder wealth. That's the only legitimate objective of business, is to maximize shareholder wealth. So if you're going to price for profit, you should maximize shareholder wealth. How should you do that? Well, you should make sure that you get the most profit. How are you going to do that? Well, There are different strategies that you can have with regard to this. A lot of American businesses are accused by businesses from other countries of being very short-term. What's a short-term strategy that uses profit? And a lot of businesses are accused of doing this. So you could have a strategy where you forego immediate profit in order to, you forego instant profit or higher profits in order to penetrate a competitive market and establish a foothold.
Is that market penetration?
That's a market penetration strategy. What's an example of this? When I was growing up in the late 1970s, early 1980s, were Japanese cars the bomb? No, they weren't.
They're still not the bomb, they just get good gas mileage.
You don't think Japanese cars are the bomb?
Right.
Really?
If you're a fan of reliability.
Absolutely, yeah, if you wanna go 300,000 miles and just change the oil and never have to worry about anything else behind it, yeah. But if
You
you
don't
wanna have an
think-
experience behind the wheel, absolutely not.
You think
I don't know, Lexus is pretty.
Lexus is?
Okay, well, fair enough. But if you're gonna spend 70 grand on it, then it better be.
I don't know if y'all have ever heard of the Nissan GTR, then you'd say that's the bomb, not the
Well,
Japanese.
yeah, that's the.
Audi R8,
I've never bought
same
one.
system, pretty much, better car.
I will tell you that when I was growing up, Japanese cars were considered kind of low-end junk. They priced, and largely, and this is one of the issues with pricing, the Japanese government actually subsidized their production in order to learn and build and penetrate a market. And that's one of the issues. Are subsidies ethical in a globalized market? One of the things that Donald Trump has said as president since he's been elected is, I'm going to end unfair trade deals. And there clearly are some there are some clearly unfair trade practices that are used out there. Our government does not largely support, although you may argue that we did under the Obama administration. What happened? The American automobile manufacturers were going broke, and we did what? We bailed them out. Was that good for America? Was that a subsidy? I would argue, by the way, unlike the banks, which many of them have not paid the American government back for the bailout, who has paid the American government back for their bailout? The automobile industry has paid their part back. But is that an unfair trade practice? Free market economists would say if they go broke, they go broke. It may be what cost Mitt Romney the election. He basically said, I would never have bailed out the auto